all the way to 300.
In an old house in Paris that was covered with vines lived 10 little girls in 2 straight lines. In 2 straight lines. I've forgotten it. The youngest one was Madeline. She was not afraid of mice. She loved the winter cold and ice. And to the tiger in the zoo, Madeline just said, poo, poo.
All right.
Johnny's in the kitchen mixing up the medicine.
What is going on, everybody? My name is Nick,
My name is Dave.
and this is our first live stream.
Without a net.
Without a net, we're going for it, but it's an exciting time, and we just want to thank all those that have put a lot of work into this. Tessellation Media is working behind the scenes. Frankie and Courtney are awesome. Nick Boker's here in the chat, who'll be feeding us some questions. And speaking of those questions, we want to make sure that you know that this is a conversation, and we would love for you to ask some questions as we talk through the sermon and talk a little more about the deeper parts of what Dave spoke about on Sunday. And the sermon title was Untangling Your Soul.
Right.
But before we get into it, we always kind of have a little bit of banter. We're kind of keeping a similar theme, but we just thought it'd be fun to try a live stream. Have you ever live streamed before?
Well, every Sunday.
Well, that's true. I guess that's true. But like have like an
not
individual.
Like this. Not with the Q&A where, either people are going to ask questions and that'll be fun. Don't play too much Stump the Pastor.
Yeah.
But, or it's going to be a very short podcast today.
Sure. But it'll be a lot of fun.
We'll find something to talk about.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. In 4th of July, do you have any fun plans? I know you told a story during the sermon, but anything else?
It was a great 4th weekend.
Yeah.
Just it's a 3-day weekend and did stuff every day. We had fireworks in our neighborhood. Ran the Peachtree Road Race.
Okay.
Again, I think the 32nd or 33rd time.
How much of it did you run?
Not as much as normal.
Okay.
Yes, I'm quite different shape than I was a year
Sure.
ago. But it was a moment in time. I was going like, I can't do this again. I've got to get in shape. So,
I have a buddy who's done it for about 30 years, and he kind of says the same thing. It's like every year I run a little bit less.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was in no shape to run it this year, but just
Sure.
keeping the tradition. So
Yeah.
it was fun. It was hot. But then afterwards, we went to my brother who lives on Lake Lanier, and I just kind of floated in the lake and just recovered there.
Yeah.
We grilled out burgers. It was wonderful. How about you?
Well, so Saturday we went to see the Canton fireworks. We have a sweet spot, actually. Shout out Generations Church. They kind of open up their space and open their bathrooms for the community to kind of come in and use. And then their parking lot is literally right in front of where they shoot off the fireworks. So we kind of set up there and had a few people join us, friends. A few people from church came and joined us, and we just kind of hung out and had a good time.
Cool.
And
It's the first thing we ever did together.
that's
But-
right. Yeah,
well,
you came and joined us.
We did the Hot Wings Challenge. That was
That's
the first
true.
thing. But yeah, that was the first thing we ever did after I moved here. 'Cause
Yeah.
I came to that last year.
That's
with you
right.
guys.
You did. And
Yeah.
you met several of the same people were there, and it was just a good time and just some good fellowship. But then jumping in the pool, through the weekend and all that good stuff. I will say, though, I think this is the first time I've been home on the 4th of July in a while, because we saw fireworks on the 2nd. We didn't go out the 4th. And we were in the pool that night, and it sounded crazy. Everybody shooting fireworks off
It was a
around.
war zone in our neighborhood for 3 days.
Yeah, that's what it felt
Yeah,
like. It was like,
yeah,
everybody
it's
duck,
crazy.
And then all of a sudden, like, you'd hear the sparklers, like, oh, that's cool, the firecrackers, whatever. And then you just get this one thud, like, doosh,
Yeah.
bah, and then everybody jumps and is scared. And
You have a dog?
I do have a dog.
How'd the dog do with it?
He does okay. He kind of just gets a little closer, but he doesn't, like, whimper or go hide. He just kind of is like, what's going on out there?
Yeah.
Our ducks, they were freaking out, too.
Ducks.
Yeah, we got ducks.
Okay, this is another conversation.
Yeah, it's true.
not aware
Well,
of
why
ducks.
don't we jump into the sermon a little bit here? Again, it's called Untangling Your Soul. And do you kind of want to give us a breakdown of it?
Right. Untangling your soul. And the idea is that somewhere in most people's house would not be in Nicole Hall's, because she's super organized and everything would be color-coded and stuff. But in our house, there are places where they've been kind of pushed away, and there are boxes that you pull out. And, you're working on some project and you need an extension cord, and you go and suddenly you got to take 5 minutes to untangle the extension cord. In my case as a musician, there are mic cords and all this kind of stuff. So those things that are tangled up, get tangled up over time. And the idea is that, it happens with things, but what happens when it's with our soul, when our soul gets tangled up?
Yeah.
And I sort of leaned back into a question that John Wesley had for his, what we would call small groups, but they would call it societies. And one of the first questions they would ask each week was, how goes it with your soul? Which I think is a very important for us to be on top of, because it's a very different thing than how are you doing?
Right.
How is it with your soul? And so, we kind of looked at that and looked at some of the things that could cause our souls to get tangled up, and also some ways in which we can untangle our souls, so maybe spiritual practices of doing that. And one of the places that we looked, because it was the first Sunday of the month, was in the Sacrament of Holy Communion. That is a space and time where we come forward. And some of the things that we tend to get tangled up in is guilt, shame, and regret. Yeah. And so when we go through that act of confession, it can take those three chords of those things and untangle them, or it should, or at least be a reminder of the grace that we walk in. And so, that was essentially the outline of the sermon, and so hopefully we'll have some questions about that. But it is an important practice that I have. I need to be reminded. Sometimes in the routine, I feel like just because I am keeping a routine that everything is okay. But when I really take some self-awareness and mindfulness to look at how am I really doing in my life?
Yeah.
Are the activities that I'm involved in, are there things that are leading me closer to God, or are there things that are sort of estranging me and pulling me away from God? And so that was it in a nutshell. So, yeah.
So while we're kind of continuing talking a little bit, again, feel free to ask some questions if you're thinking of it as we go. Drop it in. We have Nick Booker. He's kind of monitoring the chats. He's going to give us some questions here in a little bit that are out there. But I also wanted to say kind of about the tangling is it's so easy to get into being tangled up and kind of you don't even realize it. Sometimes you just feel like things are going good and you're just grinding and you're going, and then all of a sudden something shifts, like maybe you change a routine or something, and you just are like, why do I feel so off? And sometimes it comes out in a random outlash, or like you're taking something personally that you never really would take personally. Like you just feel, and you're like, what is going on? And you realize you're like, man, I'm tangled up here.
Do you find, Nick, that sometimes people aware around me who love me and know me realize before I do that I'm not doing well? Have you found that to be true? Or
yeah, I think so. I think I would say that, at least in like Rachel's case, I think she can call things out of me mostly before I realize how big of a deal.
Yeah.
I think I feel the tangling of the cords happening a little bit, but she calls it out in a space of like recognition. Do you know what I mean? It's like what they say at AA is like the first step is admitting you have the problem, right? And then once you kind of admit it, you kind of like, oh, and then you start unraveling it a little bit. I think so. I do think so people do that.
Well, there is this one of the things I mentioned in the sermon was the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. Which I couldn't even begin to explain the scientific part of that. But I do know that things just like cords and hoses and stuff at home do have a tendency towards chaos. That that's something whether it's you cleaned up your office and you've got it all spick and span, and then 6 months later it's going like, what happened here? If you don't stay on top of it, things are going to go from order to disorder. Yeah. And so it's easy to see something physical like an office or your garage or whatever, but it's a little bit different sometimes when it's something that's so personal as like where you are, particularly those of us who work at a church.
Sure.
So, as a pastor, as a professional layperson, that, we are supposed to have it together, and we learn to pretend.
Yeah.
Sometimes. And so I think it's important, because if we're not in that good space, I think it's hard for us to lead in the way that we need to be leading.
I think that is very true. And often, we talk about in staff meeting is taking care of ourselves.
Right. You're very good about that.
And making sure that, we can only lead to a point that we have been. So we need to continue in our faith, and that's just as important practice as leading the others in their faith. So
if y'all don't know this, Nick leads our staff in our staff meetings, and you do it just about every week. You call us to that, and that's a very important thing. I appreciate you doing that. It's a gift that you give us. And, we're kind of in summertime where people are taking vacations, and that can help
Right.
with some of that to find a place to unwind. But even sometimes on vacation, if we've taken time off, find a Sabbath place for us, things happen because with stuff like this, we don't totally disconnect like we should. And then with responsibilities that we have for family and other things, it's sometimes hard to completely let go and maybe get to a space that recenters us.
Yeah. Well, why don't we move into a little bit of our question and answers time? Nick, do you have anything for us?
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yes. First question is, it seems to me that part of the reason we get tangled up is because we don't practice the commandment about keeping the Sabbath. What does it mean to keep the Sabbath holy?
Wow, that's a great question. That's spot on. It is. Well, first of all, I would say I'm reminded that Jesus saying that, because I think you can get legalistic about that. Jesus healed people on the Sabbath. They ate on the Sabbath. They picked grain one time, but that and he said, the Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath is for us, and to have a time of rest. I think it gets us into this sort of rhythm of life of knowing that, like, if we're just going, and never take a time to sit and not be about work, not be about and finding a place to be mindful that in this world that we're not God, and so sometimes just back off a little bit and let God be God, and so the Sabbath is also about worship. I've tried to practice the Sabbath, and it's a little bit different because we work on Sundays.
Correct.
So my Sabbath is usually on Fridays. And I do things that bring me joy and energy, and as a lot of all these folks know, and well, part of what I do is I go and play bluegrass on Sabbath, and so it brings me joy and center, and I'm really able to relax with that. But find time. Then, how about you?
When I think of Sabbath, I almost think I go back to even part of the creation is. This is something that was instituted before, like, even sin came into order. Before Adam and Eve ate the apple, like, God showed us that Sabbath is important because He did it on the seventh day. And God could have created everything in one day. I think if He wanted to, I think He could have done that. But I think in the process, He wanted creation to kind of so that every part of it has significance,
right? So
that we knew that this part as well, this Sabbath part, has significance. And to me, it's almost that God looked back and appreciated all that had been done. Mm-hmm. And it kind of reminds me that on Sabbath days, and I'm not the best at taking Sabbath days. It is something we're working at in our household. Actually, me and Rachel just recently had a conversation about, like, I feel like I should be doing more on the Sabbath, and we kind of looked at each other and it's like, no, like, this, like, because we're doing it as Sundays right now, or Sunday afternoons, because they kind of have freed up, and it's like, no, this is a time we need to rest. It's a time we need to take inventory and be appreciative of what has happened the week, because especially in our society, this is a kind of a countercultural thing, because we want to work ahead on the Sabbath to kind of get ahead of ourselves, or get ahead of the game, be set up for the next day or whatever, and honestly, like, if we don't sit back and appreciate what has been done, the work that we have accomplished, or the time that we have with people we love, I think we're missing a point.
Yeah, I wonder, and I would love to hear some comments from people about how they practice that. Sometimes I feel like, Chick-fil-A's closed on the Sabbath on Sundays, so
Which is like the only day that I crave Chick-fil-A.
But that, I think there are people who have done that and carved out that boundary for themselves better than I have. But I look at Christians in general, as opposed to, Teresa and I used to live in a neighborhood that was predominantly Jewish. And I just looked to those folks with some of the ways which they practiced their faith that I really admired. And one of those was the practice of Sabbath, because it became a day. It was for family. It was for rest. They walked to the temple, and that it was set aside. And it really does seem to center them and remind them of the order of life, I think more. I think sometimes Sabbath for us is all just about, well, we need to rest one day a week. But there was really more to it than just, okay, I need to, rest and not be working. It was a dedication to some other things, and a reminder and what they did and what they did not do of their faith and their relationship with God.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Nick, do you have any other questions for us? Or any comments on that?
No comments.
Okay.
Next question.
yeah.
Dave talked about taking care of our souls by identifying those activities that cause our souls to flourish and those activities that drain the life out of our souls. What do we do when some of the things that are draining us are also the things that are necessary, like jobs, family, commitments, and other parts of life?
Oh, good. That's a good question.
Yeah. I might have to think about that one for a sec.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a deep question. There is responsibilities that we have. I think finding balance, and if our there's seasons of life that we go through when life is really hard. Like, I know you're about to go through something with your mother, and there's going to be a lot of caregiving that's going to be required on your part, and that's undoubtedly going to cause some stress in your life.
Sure.
I think you have to find the rest in the untangling some other places, but it's just a time of your life that you're going through. Without knowing the whole context of that. I mean, if you are in a job that is just completely stressing you out, it may be time to approach it in a different way, or maybe even find another job. I hate to put it that way. I mean, life is too short to be in something that's going to be causing you misery. But there's seasons with your. So I think I actually referred to this in one of the services. I watch families getting up to come to the church, and it reminds me of when I was a young father, and we had to get our kids together, and we had to be there on Sundays, and we wanted our kids to be bathed and have their hair combed and be acting right. And sometimes the stress of just getting to church was just
it's real.
Let's go worship God now. We've been yelling at each other in the car. So but that was a season of life, and I think you have to find ways within that sort of center. And just I say this, just those things are going to pass at time, and there may be better ways of facilitating them as you're going through. But sometimes there are going to be stresses with life, so you have to find that space somewhere else, that personal space. I mean, we all need it. I started to say this before. There's an old, I think it was in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but it was talking about taking time to sharpen your saw. Have you heard that? It's the two guys that were hired to cut down trees, and so the first day this guy cut down the record number of trees. But by the end of the week, the foreman's going to him and saying, we're going to have to let you go. You're not cutting down, you started off great, but now you're not, cutting as many trees, where this other guy stopped every day to sharpen his saw. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes we get at something, just feel like we've got to put our head down and keep going without finding that Sabbath, finding that place to be to find center, to be self-aware, to be self-reflective, to untangle our souls.
Yeah. Maybe what I have, this might be a little bit of a side tangent to kind of go with it, but I think I would tell people who feel like their obligations are maybe some of the stuff that are tangling them up, especially when it comes to like, this is how my family has to interact, or this is what I need to give them, or whatever, is give yourself a little bit of a break. Mm-hmm. I I think we get caught up in the rat race, and we have these expectations based on what we're seeing from other people, whether it's a social media post or how they look when they walk into the church in their matching, outfits. And they are the ones smiling, and you're just got, like you said, just kind of got out of the car like, everybody shut up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're gonna go worship God. Like we kind of have these ideals of like how it should look, whether we saw it on a Disney movie or whatever. But I think we need to give ourselves a little bit of a break, because people sometimes put on, like, they always either put on their best, and on social media sometimes they put on their worst, but they don't put on like these normal everyday routines. Like, everybody gets frustrated at their kids sometimes. Everybody gets frustrated at traffic and stuff like that. But I feel like, I say this coming from a place of probably this is vulnerability, is like, sometimes I feel drained that I can't live up to some expectations that I've set for myself.
On you've set for yourself.
That I've set for myself.
Right.
So like, I'm like a self-fulfilling prophecy that I'm draining myself trying to catch something that maybe I need to be giving myself a break on. This is just me being open and honest. But I will look at the social media posts and be like, man, look what they're doing. You know what I mean? Or maybe I should be, doing cannonballs in the pool more often or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, they just look like they're having so much fun. Or when you try to do something fun and the kids are like, this is lame.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like,
well, and I think you hit on something key there, and that was part of the direction of the end of the sermon to end up with the sacrament of Holy Communion is understanding that is a gift of grace, and having the grace that to live to understand you are God's beloved child.
Yeah.
Okay, God loves you. God forgives you. God meets you exactly where you are. God loves you too much to leave you that way.
Right.
But to be able to live and find those moments of grace, I think, Holy Communion is one of those places. But find those moments of grace and give grace to yourself and give forgiveness to yourself. And those, they're spiritual practices to do that. But sometimes it's just as simple as just, taking time out and sitting quietly 10 minutes.
Well,
sip a glass
and
of
that's
tea
what
or
I was going to
something.
say. Like, the physical thing you can do is carve out some time for yourself. And I know I've had conversations with people where they're like, I feel selfish to, like, when I haven't achieved, but I need to take a break, or I need to step in. It's like, no. Like, you take this break so that you can achieve more later. You know what I mean? Like, or you find this space of rest. I'm a person that I need on my like hour at night before I go to bed.
Yeah.
Like, that's my wind down time, because my brain's constantly going otherwise, And so I might be watching the Braves game. I might be playing video games or whatever, but I just wind down for that hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, okay, because then I can kind of get my rest, or I can go have conversations with whatever, and just taking that moment to myself just opens up a lot of doors, and some people that's going to work out, some people that's getting up an hour earlier than everybody else, so you have some quiet time and quiet space. And a good practice in that is reading a Bible, finding a space where you're getting scripture, kind of starting your day and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot we can do physically to help untangle us. We just kind of have to make we say that there's no time, but really, if we took an account of all the time that we do have, we can create space.
Yeah. And what I heard you saying is a great point, that it's different. It looks different from person to person. And I remember a devotion. I don't remember the exact quote. Maybe you will, because you were the one who gave it. But 2 or 3 weeks ago in staff meeting, about like God saying to the person, why didn't you take off more time to be you?
Yeah.
So, God wants us not to be some ideal of a post we see on Facebook or some projection that maybe somebody else put on us, but to find out who we are and to be the very best person that we can be. And so to do that, I think takes some spiritual practices. One of them is asking, how goes it with your soul?
Yeah.
And being attentive to that.
And I think that's the key, is like being attentive to your soul, because being the best version of yourself is also being the best version of yourself for everybody else.
Yeah.
You know, we can constantly get caught up in just pulling aside everybody else's stuff and helping them out and stuff like that. But we're going to dig ourselves into a hole eventually with it, you know? And if we take the time to kind of find our own practices of rest, find our own practices of things that fill us, that's what's going to set us up well. And I'm not saying, and I want to be clear, like, I'm not saying be selfish with your time and don't spend time on this other stuff because you got better things to do. Like, sometimes you got to find the balance that works in your life, because we do have some obligations that we have to meet, you know, like working and providing for your family. That's a good thing to be doing, you know, but how do you find the breaks from that and find the time around that you can also fill your soul?
Yeah, if you don't find that, you know, if you're in a situation where you have to be giving care for another person, which most of us have at some level in our lives, if we're not finding that time for ourselves, we're not going to be able to give that kind of care that we want to be able to give.
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, it's a necessary thing.
I kind of have a side question for you is, what if the person doesn't know what fills it? Like an activity that fills them? Does it make sense? Does the question make sense?
Yeah, a little bit, but I have so many hobbies. It's really hard for me to relate
to.
There are a lot of things, but yeah, but I do that. You know, it's like I do hear people saying like you do all these things. You know, I don't have those. Those, I find one. I wish I could be. That may not sound very sensitive, but. You know, try some things out.
Yeah.
You know, find something that brings you joy, and it's going to look different from person to person.
Right.
You know, it may be reading, it may be knitting, it may be exercise, spending time with others, spending time by yourself.
Yeah.
You know, just that's a very personal thing. But
Sure. Nick, you got anything else for us?
This one is from Dawn Williams.
Oh, okay.
She says, I love the fact that we have open communion, but what about the verse in Corinthians that says anyone that does not take communion in a contrite manner is subject to judgment?
Yeah, I got a heads up that this may be coming because that's really not about sermon. We did have communion, and you know, each time we have communion, I do make a big deal, as I think most Methodist pastors were, that in our tribe as Methodists, we practice what's called open communion. And it's interesting, there's this one passage that gets used in both ways. Sometimes I've heard it used as a justification for closed communion, not having it open to everybody. And then I would use it as justification for having open communion. But just to go back, there are like different ways in which I think we approach the table, and depending on what our faith background may be, people who grew up as Roman Catholics, they have this practice called Transubstantiation, and that they believe that the bread and the wine literally become the body and blood of Christ. Now, I've been explaining this not exactly literally the way that we might, as Protestants, address it.
Sure.
But whereas there are a lot of churches that look at Holy Communion as a memorial service, is to remind us as a memory of what Jesus did for us. And it's certainly part of that. In the Methodist Church, which comes from Martin Luther, actually, he taught this, practiced something called Consubstantiation, which means with substance, that we believe that Jesus is there in the sacraments. And what I would say is, whether or not we are aware of it or not, God is present in the sacraments. Yeah. And so, because of that, it becomes about God's grace and not about something that we've done, whether it's joining a church or completing some class or reaching some age or that sort of things. It's God's grace moving towards us, whether there's a human response in that, but it's primarily about God's grace. So this, looking at this passage and also understanding the context of what's going on in the Corinthian church, they had great divisions in the Corinthian church, and there's all the stuff about in Christ there is no poor or rich or slave or or Greek or Jew or whatever. We're all one in Christ, but that when they were coming together, there was division,
Right.
and particularly around this, and what we've come to know as the sacrament of Holy Communion with the bread and the juice or the wafers or whatever, it was more like a meal for them. And so those that were the haves, the rich people, were having, kind of a feast there, where some of the poor people that were there among them, maybe the slaves are among them, were starving. They didn't have anything at all. And so Paul, writes in that, let me just read that passage there. Now in the following instructions, I do not commend you, because when you came together, it is not for better, but the worse. For to begin with, when you came together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you, and to some extent I believe it. Indeed, there are factions among you. When you come together, it is not really to eat the Lord's Supper. That's what we're practicing. For when the time comes to eat, each of you goes ahead with your own supper, and one goes hungry, and another becomes drunk. And I don't know if they were having this practice of everybody just having a wild party and getting drunk. I'm just assuming that Paul's talking about an excess there. You're eating and drinking. He says, so it goes on, he says, for what I received from the Lord, what I also handed on to you. But the Lord Jesus, on the night that he was betrayed, took a loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body that is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, he took the cup, and after supper said, this cup is the new covenant in my body. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat the bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. And so they're right in the middle of this sort of instructions that Paul has given them. He gives what actually has become part of our communion sacrament, right? Those words are familiar. And then it's after that where he talks about whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be answerable for the body and blood of the Lord. And so what he has just instructed us in is is a way in which is a worthy way of receiving the sacrament. So, John Wesley thought of communion as a part of it is an act of evangelism in a way, and taste and see that the Lord is good. And I know stories, I've had, testimonies I could tell you where people have come in not really knowing much about God, but coming in and receiving Holy Communion, and in that grace leading them into a relationship with Christ. There's a whole book called Take This Bread by Sarah Miles I highly recommend, about how her life was completely changed when she stumbled into a church one day and took the bread and could not get that out of her mind and out of her life. But even when we say there's an holy, that it's an open table, remember the very first things that say in that order of worship every month, it says those Christ invites to his table all who love him and seek to live a new life in Christ. And so there are stipulations, but they're gracious stipulations that we receive. And so I don't know if this answers Dawn's question. This is probably a sermon or a Bible study sometime. But
I don't know that I have anything to add to that. So that was pretty thorough.
Okay.
Nick, do you got anything else over there for us?
Yes, one more question.
Okay.
Dave or Nick, do you have any resources you would recommend for understanding the practice of Sabbath?
Oof.
I will have to look it up and post it later, but there is a book, and it was actually by a Jewish woman that I read one time on the Sabbath, which was very, very good for me. And then I think there's another book, it's a Christian book called Sabbath, that kind of explains it and goes into detail. Let me, while you're talking right now, let me see if I can get the author of that one.
Yeah, I don't really know of any direct resources. I catch a lot of podcasts, and there's several really good podcasts out there that if you just take a gander and kind of do some Google searches, you can find out, some of the churches. I wish Rachel was here because she kind of put me on to several of them, and I don't know who asked the question.
Rachel Yother.
Rachel, of course. I figured. So maybe Rachel could post a couple of those podcasts because she's been kind of going through a Sabbath journey a little bit herself.
So this is the book that I was thinking about, Sabbath by Wayne Mueller. I've read that book a couple of times and actually preached on it in the past before as well. That's a great book that I would highly recommend discovering and looking about the Sabbath. Let me see if I can find that other one. Probably not. That may be as good as I can do. Yeah, let's just leave it there. We'll post some others later. Got another one? Yeah.
With our complicated lives and tangled time constraints, why does consistency of going to church matter?
I think that it is, as I watch my Jewish friends spend time with family, not do certain things on the Sabbath and walk to church, I think it's just that reminder that keeps us centered. And I know it can be stressful, particularly for young families getting their kids all together. But I just think the fellowship of coming together, of worship, of those things which hopefully you're receiving in church that remind us of the order of our lives. So that's why I think consistent worship, consistent gathering together as believers is paramount to growing and being centered in our faith.
I also think it's literally a physical removal of our normal everyday life. You're being removed from your house, you're being removed from all the stuff that you see around the house that you could do, you're being removed from your job, you're being removed, and you're coming to a place that you can center and focus in on God. And I think having that as a consistent piece in our world, and I think that's even why we probably encourage each day, if you can find a space that you could separate yourself out of that and just focus in on your relationship with Christ, focus in on genuine worship and adoration to God. I really feel like that's the benefits of coming to church. But then you also have community of people that you truly live life with. And I think having those people around also reminds us and can kind of keep us centered. Dave was talking earlier about having people that love you, that can see stuff in you, that can call stuff out of you and stuff like that. And I think the place that we want to have those kind of relationships is at church. I yearn for people to come to me and be like, hey, I see this amazing thing in you, but also I see where you could work, that you could lovingly work on yourself. You know what I mean? I feel like having that community around you, but also having a space to just come to the Lord is a big deal.
Yeah. And the community part of it is what's important. I mean, who's going to ask you how goes it with your soul?
Right.
I mean, you can ask that to yourself, but is it as honest of looking at somebody else? And so,
especially somebody that can know when you're, faking it until you make it or whatever.
So I guess Rachel saw me looking at my phone and she sent me 3 books. So I'll give those titles too.
I knew it.
Yeah.
Told you. Thank you, Rachel.
One of them is called Take Back Your Family. One of them is To Hell with the Hustle.
Yeah.
Great title. And let's see what this other one is, if I can get it up big enough here to read it. Alive in the Chaos of the Modern World. I guess that's the name of it. That may be a podcast. What is this? Oh, no, it's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Yeah.
It's by John Ortberg. I know John Ortberg. So, yeah, there's some good resources that come with the recommendation of the lovely Rachel. So,
and she is constantly looking around for stuff like that. So, anything else over there, Boker?
Yes. Last and final question.
Okay.
Have either of you found an easy way / practice to quote unquote reset your lives to bring you back on track with God?
I mean, I think we mentioned some of them. One of the things for me that I don't do enough here, particularly lately, is hiking.
Yeah.
I have found if I can leave my phone and go hike someplace for a half a day, even, there's just something about that. Well, and it's not like I'm even doing anything. It's just kind of letting my mind go during that time. But somehow or another, for me, it's a personal thing that has centered me. If you're looking for a book or a podcast or whatever to listen to, that's not really my style.
Yeah.
My style is just kind of getting out with nature, and in that I can find God, and it will recenter me. And then I will go and do the things that I need for my spiritual growth, like study the Bible, read books, listen to podcasts, whatever.
Yeah. I heard the word easy, and I would argue that sometimes it's not easy. But finding ways to get out and just experience something new, and nature is a great place to do it, especially going on a hike where you're not as familiar with it or whatever. But just the art of like not knowing what to expect sometimes gives you a sense of a piece of like, let's just go with the flow, and I appreciate those times because I'm normally I'm a habitual person. I kind of I wake up at the same time, I shower, like I do my life in kind of an order. Sometimes do I?
You're a 9.
I'm a 9.
Yeah.
And I like that order, but there are times that the order controls, and I think the time when I'm willing to just say like, whatever comes, whatever. I feel like that's refreshing to me because then I don't have to be the analytical one. I don't have to, like I just kind of have to go with the flow, and that tends to reset me. Finding those spaces, me and Rachel try to go away together, every 6 months or so for a weekend, and just even if it's just to a cabin in a place that we haven't been, and just experiencing whatever's in that area, whether it's a river, whether it's a small town, it's freeing because I'm not thinking about the normal stuff, and I'm with somebody I care for. And
one of the things I would say, not adding to, but taking away from, I have learned, we've mentioned social media here a couple of times today. I don't plug into that as much because it is a distraction to my faith. And maybe some other people can, but it distracts me. I don't watch near as much news as I used to because it's a distraction. Finding those things that are not causing my soul to flourish, and finding the things that do help me shine and flourish.
And I think that's a huge point. In my time in youth ministry, I often compared us to sponges, and we're absorbing so much, whether we realize it or not, whether it's what we're listening to, what we're watching, just the people that we're with, we're taking in so much. So finding the things that aren't bringing joy and removing that, it gives more room for the stuff that do fill us. So
good. Yeah.
Well, those are great questions. Thank you for everybody who did participate and drop in questions. And if you didn't and you've got questions later, shoot them to us.
Yeah.
We're happy to continue the conversation. And also let us know if you like this live stream format. We kind of figured, we didn't have our normal day because it was the 4th of July to film. So we thought we'd try something new. And our awesome team over here, again, Tessellation Media, thank you guys so much. They've been here since 9 o'clock or so to help us kind of get set up and running so that this goes so smoothly. Nick Boker, our production team manager here, and our IT and comms, or Swiss Army knife, as you'd say.
I think he's
he might be asleep back there. We don't really know, but they've all been working very hard to help make this happen. So we're appreciative to them, and just if you got any audio video needs, please check out Tessellation Media. They're awesome, and they really help us out around here a lot.
Yeah, and I hope this has been helpful. I know it's been different, and it seems like it's gone longer today, and hopefully it's made some sense. But I've really enjoyed doing it.
Yeah,
I kind of like having stuff thrown at me a little bit. So that's been kind of cool.
It's a nice change up.
It's a nice change up.
And And we were kind of getting to a point where it's like we only had to record once, so we felt a little confident coming into it. And then, a couple questions were like, oh, maybe I could have used a couple more things to think about here. But thank you guys so much for being around and being a part of this. And this will be posted later, just like our normal podcast. So this is just another way that we might do it ever so often. Let us know what you think. Any suggestions you have for us, we'd always love to take it.
So let me give you a little preview for you Hickory Flat folks of what we're doing in worship for the next 3 weeks. We are doing a kind of a summer message series. We just got out of doing the movie series. And so for the next 3 weeks, though, we're looking at a series we're calling Riptide. And so that's kind of based on the metaphor of when you go to the beach and, riptides, rip currents are infinitely more dangerous than sharks. Mm-hmm. We sometimes think of what's the danger at the beach, and we think, oh, we're not going to swim because it's sharks. They're rip currents are what's going to get us, and they sort of lure us in, and we sort of gently get off, and suddenly we can be way out. So we're going to be looking at the life of David through that, and kind of considering that in ways in which we can prevent ourselves, look at the warning signs, and be able to keep ourselves safer and closer to God.
There you go.
Yeah.
That sounds like a great series, and I'm excited for it. I think it'll be a lot of fun. Some deep spiritual meanings, hopefully some good stuff that we can deep dive on.
Sure.
And we'll be back we'll have to talk about that because I'm on vacation next week.
Not on Monday. Are you? You are.
Oh, I might could sneak over here for a little bit.
We'll
figure it out.
All right.
Anyways, guys, we appreciate you being here, and we'll catch you next time.
All right. God bless.